Okay, I think we're live. So, hello everybody, and welcome to Opera 101 with the Cleveland Opera Theater. My name is Stephanie Russo, and I'm an Education and Outreach Associate with the Cleveland Opera Theater. Happy to be here with you today for our edition of Opera 101, and that's our Monday through Friday series where we get to talk all things opera and look at some fascinating little portion of the genre of the output that it's just fun for us all to know and helps us deepen the meaning of what we see on stage. So, to make that experience deeper for you, please do contact us and drop a question in the comment box at any time. I'd love to hear from you and answer it in real time as we chat, or email me at sruzo@clevelandoperatheater.org. That's SRUOZZO at clevelandoperatheater.org. And I'd be very happy to chat with you, send any information your way that you might want. So, the thing that we want to talk about today is this idea of Rigoletto as this kind of flashpoint in Verdi's career. And Dean, actually, a week ago when we chatted Aida, he kind of brought up the periodization of Verdi's career and how certain operas signify transitions in Verdi's style. And Verdi was never a man to remain stagnant, he was never a man to allow time to pass him by without growing and developing as an artist. So when we periodize his career, we look at different sections of output. There's obviously the early Verdi and the late Verdi that Dean mentioned, but I want to zero in on this thing that Megan mentioned on Monday, this use of Rigoletto as a flashpoint in periodization of Verdi's career. So Rigoletto actually was part of a trilogy of operas from 1851 to 1853. Rigoletto kicked off this little trilogy that helped him transition from his early period into his middle period. And of course, this trio are three of the famous operas, most famous operas of Verdi's that we recognize today. So we've got Rigoletto, La Traviata, and Il Trovatore. So between 1851 and 1853, there was this massive change in his style, exemplified by these three operas. So he had some fame and success before that, mostly in Milan, but these three established him worldwide as a household name in the figures of opera. And so with maturity comes not at the focus on harmonic experimentation that we might see with Wagner or the other German composers, but freer forms and larger scales of opera. So everything gets bigger, grander, and more established in Verdi's middle period. So Verdi's career before 1851 was this kind of hectic, frantic period of chaos in his life. Starting from 1839 to 1853, he called these his quote-unquote galley years because he worked like a galley slave. You know those guys that are rowing in the bottom of the boat, and they're doing all the hard labor basically to move massive things. Well, that's what Verdi felt like he was doing from 1839 to 1853. So these galley years were hard for him because he had to work at such a frantic pace. He wrote 16 operas in those years. So thinking about it, it's, maybe a little over 11 years that he was putting out more than one opera a year. And these aren't short operas. These are full scale works. That's a lot of composition. And the pace was even picking up towards the end of those galley years, because in the last few of those years, he averaged 2 operas per year prior to 1853. Writing one opera a year is an achievement. 2 operas a year is absolute insanity. So we have to give Verdi his props on keeping up with this. And this wasn't counting his overseeing of revivals of earlier operas. So, when a new theatrical company or when a new opera company, a new opera house wanted to stage one of Verdi's old operas, Verdi would often be called in to oversee the production and let them know if they're doing it right or not, or how he wanted it done. And so Verdi was working not only as a composer, but he's working as, kind of dramaturg, critic, director, producer for his earlier operas at the same time. And this isn't counting his travels, extensive travels to France and Russia to oversee the premiere of operas in those countries. But the galley years began with Verdi's first full opera, Oberto, in 1839 at Milan's La Scala. So, like we said, he had his reputation in Milan, and this is where he starts building it with Oberto. And it was successful. It brought him three more commissions, got largely positive reviews. People recognized him as a talent up and coming in the opera world. But it wasn't always a steady advance from that first success to the legacy that we recognize today. So, around that exact time, around 1839, his two small children actually died tragically, really right next to each other in time. And then his first wife, Margherita, died in 1840. So, back to back to back tragedies in that regard. Then there was the professional fiasco of Un giorno di regno. It was his second opera and his first attempt into the comic foray, or first foray into comic opera. And that flopped so badly, it very nearly derailed his whole career. And so he didn't make another foray into the world of comic opera until Falstaff in 1893, less than a decade before his death. So, as a young man, he learned, let's not touch comedy for a bit, thanks to Un giorno di regno. And what distinguishes these galley years, what distinguishes those operas sonically, is the dominance of the chorus. So he kind of invented, I hate using the word invented because, music is never the product of one person's ideas. There are a bunch of influences swirling around. But Verdi gets credit for instituting this genre called the aria per coro. And the perfect example of that is Va Pensiero from Nabucco. And what an aria per coro is, it's when the chorus is actually featured in a showpiece. So the set pieces of the opera revolve around the chorus rather than soloists. And I'm going to relate this back to the idea of the Risorgimento opera that we talked about a few weeks ago. So he's delving into political subjects where the chorus represents a united population. He's also starting to experiment with forms in this time, in the galley years period. So forms that had been set in place by earlier bel canto composers like Rossini, Bellini, Donizetti, they were established so that there would be a slow first portion contrasting with a very fast second portion. And I'm vastly oversimplifying here, but that's generally the way we can understand opera scenes in bel canto opera before Verdi. But Verdi starts emphasizing the contrast between these multi-movement, what we call grand double arias, and this simpler connective material like romanzas, or something more natural, something more casual, that is just, simply there to be pleasing to the ear and more relatable, accessible to audiences. And we see this move in his galley years. These galley years operas were also centered usually around three characters, very often a love triangle, but sometimes it could be two lovers and a parental figure, or some other equally obstructive person who's trying to derail the love story between those two lovers. So the three main characters were a feature of these galley years operas that we could rely on that dramatis personae structure. But then, like I said, we have this trio kicking off with Rigoletto. So what happens with Rigoletto, and what happens between 1851 and 1853, where Verdi enjoys this worldwide success? Well, he was able to slow down his pace of composition. He didn't have to do two operas a year anymore to stay fiscally afloat. He was able to be more judicious about which commissions he took, which people did he want to work with, which opera houses did he want to feature his works at. And he could accept more control over the subject matter that he was staging and dramatizing. So I don't want to write an opera about that, or I want to tell this story in a different way. And Verdi gained more control over his output in that period, because early Verdi usually had to defer to the success and reputations of his more established librettists, like Temistocles Solera. So when Verdi was working with Solera, Solera was usually making the decisions about how to structure a given scene. And as Verdi branches out and gets more established with this worldwide success, all of a sudden his librettists were having to kind of acquiesce to Verdi's demands and Verdi's judgment. Verdi also had time to revise more. He was able to take a firmer role in changing things that had already been staged. He could actually take older works of his, go back and say, I really wasn't a fan of the way this played out the first time. I'm going to make some serious adjustments with the score, and let's restage it and see how that works. So he had a larger part in overseeing productions. He was able to be a more authoritative figure. Another product of this of the 1851-53 period is that Verdi was actually able to kick off a side gig as a politician, and as he was getting more active in political advocacy for a united Italy, like we talked about with the Risorgimento opera, he was actually appointed deputy for the Borgo di San Donnino in the first National Italian Parliament in 1861. So we might think of a deputy as something like a senator or representative in Congress to us, where he spoke on behalf of his local constituents as a member of the national legislature. So then, as Dean pointed out, after Aida, he was even able to take a step further back and go through this 16-year break from composing operas, known as the interregnum. But again, that's not to diminish his achievements in overseeing operas, traveling to other places to stage works that had already been composed, and his composition of chamber music and the Requiem Mass for Alessandro Manzoni at that time. So, what distinguishes the operas of this middle period from the earlier operas? What do we see after Rigoletto that we didn't see before Rigoletto? Well, everything is just bigger. It's getting broader. Longer run times, larger casts and choruses and orchestras, so just more people on the stage, period. The opera houses are getting bigger, so there's bigger audiences as well as bigger casts. He's also blurring the genre lines between what we might think of as the earlier bel canto and something that kind of evolved into the melodrama of Puccini and Verismo. The coloratura, because he's actually giving the voices more weight and making the melodic lines more ponderous, and I don't mean that as a pejorative, I mean he's giving them a lot of heft. Coloratura became more of a strictly feminine virtue, and the tenors, the men, especially tenors as well as bass baritones, became more about sustaining powerful notes rather than those scales and arpeggios we talked about with coloratura before. He also, the final thing he really develops during this middle period is the idea of the reminiscence motive. So it's not Verdi's original idea. For instance, Donizetti had been using reminiscence motives in Lucia di Lammermoor. But Verdi was known for using reminiscences in the most insightful ways to guide his drama. A reminiscence motive is just a reminiscence motive that keeps coming back at strategic points in the genre in ways that tell the story through music rather than relying on words alone. Or they might give us insight into what the characters are thinking rather than the action that's going on from plot point to plot point. So these reminiscence motives are a way of deepening the drama on stage and pulling audiences into the drama in a way that they did not have access to before. The perfect example that a lot of music historians point to is the end of Rigoletto, where we hear this horrifying recapitulation of La Donna è mobile when Rigoletto discovers that his daughter was the victim of the assassin rather than the Duke as he intended. And we realize that because Verdi pulls in this reminiscence motive of the Duke's music. And so it hits Verdi that the Duke is still alive and in charge. And so that reminiscence motive is guiding the drama in a way that words alone could not. If this sounds like a leitmotiv, it is not exactly a leitmotiv. If you say that Verdi copied Wagner, the ghost of Verdi will come back and haunt you. That's just a fair warning. So it's different from a leitmotif, but that's probably the most important development that we see coming out of this 1851-53 period going forward and defining Verdi's middle period. And so that's all I have for you guys to keep in mind right now. But if you have any questions, please do send them my way, either via the comments here or via email. And please do check out tomorrow's Maestro's Corner edition of Opera 101, same time, same place. Please do head to our website at clevelandoperatheater.org so you can join our mailing list, get all of our written communications like that, and tune in to our summer concert series, which is free and accessible for all online. You can find all the info on that at our website, clevelandoperatheater.org. And we hope to see you there. Thanks, guys. Bye.